The laugh broke the cabin like glass. Polished seats, soft lights, and the steady hum of engines kept the flight calm, until one sharp laugh cut through. Heads lifted. In seat 3A, a woman with pearl earrings touched her lips as if to hide a joke, then let another laugh escape. It was not joy. It was pride, mixed with cruelty. Across the aisle sat Marcus Hayes, a black CEO with a worn leather briefcase resting by his leg. He looked up slowly because dignity moves at its own pace. Now every eye seemed to notice him. The woman leaned toward her companion and whispered on purpose. "Some people only look first class," she said, making sure Marcus could hear. Her words carried the weight of insult, not humor. A man beside her smirked. Another passenger closed his eyes, pretending not to notice. Silence often protects the wrong side. A flight attendant paused nearby, torn between stepping in or staying quiet. Her training told her to remain calm, but her conscience wanted to act. She met Marcus's eyes for a brief second before moving on. Marcus touched the leather briefcase, a gift from his late father. "Carry your work like it matters," his father once told him. Tonight, the briefcase was more than luggage. It was a reminder of his journey and his worth. The woman laughed again, longer this time, as if tearing the quiet apart. She lifted her phone to record her champagne, letting the camera drift just enough to capture Marcus in the frame. Her pearls glimmered under the cabin lights, shining coldly. She didn't need to say his name. Her gaze made the target clear. The hush in business class made her laughter louder. A young boy nearby asked his mother, "Why is that lady laughing at the man?" The mother hushed him quickly, pressing a finger to her lips. Marcus inhaled deeply, held the breath, and released it slowly. His hands stayed folded, his shoulders steady like a man holding back a storm. He had many answers ready, but he chose silence. Not because he had no words, but because he knew which words the world would twist against him. The flight attendant returned with a glass of water, her voice soft. "Would you like anything else, sir?" Her words carried more meaning than service. They carried quiet respect. Marcus thanked her. Even gratitude can be a shield. The woman raised her glass high. "To standards," she declared loudly. Her companion tried to laugh with her but failed. The toast hung heavy in the cabin, cold and sharp. Small signs appeared among the passengers. One man cleared his throat and turned away. A woman locked her tablet and placed it face down. The boy kept staring, waiting to see if the grown-ups would act justly. The aircraft tilted slightly as it moved through the clouds. The metal creaked, a soft reminder that everyone on board shared the same trust in the machine. Marcus adjusted his seatbelt. He remembered his first business flight years ago, when no one thought he could succeed. He had promised himself then that pride would never destroy his kindness. The pearls flashed once more as the woman prepared to speak again, sharper this time. The flight attendant's jaw tightened. Marcus kept his eyes fixed on the aisle line, a pale strip of carpet running to the locked door at the front. And then it happened. All eyes turned. Silence swallowed the cabin. The speakers clicked. The pilot's voice began to crackle through the intercom. The leather briefcase rested at Marcus Hayes's side, like a silent witness. Its edges were worn, its handle softened by years of use. In that cabin, surrounded by polished glass and silver trays, the case looked out of place. Yet it carried more weight than any luxury bag in the aisle. Marcus had grown up far from this world of folded napkins and fine wine. His childhood streets were cracked, lined with corner shops and old brick walls. Money was scarce, but hope was steady. His father, a quiet man who worked double shifts, once placed the briefcase in his son's hands. "Carry this when you build something of your own," he said. Not because of what it holds, but because of what it means. Marcus never forgot those words. As a boy, he had studied under dim lamps, pages turning while others outside chased distractions. In college, he worked nights at a loading dock, lifting boxes until his back burned, then walked into class at dawn. He knew failure, but he also knew how to stand again. The smile he carried now, calm and patient, was built from years of discipline. It was not the smile of someone untouched by hardship. It was the smile of someone who had walked through it and refused to let it harden him. On the flight, as the woman's laughter echoed, fragments of his journey returned to him. The boardroom where he was the only black man at the table, hearing doubts and whispers. The contracts he won by being twice as prepared. The nights when rejection came with a polite voice but a closed door. Each moment shaped him, not into bitterness but into steel wrapped in grace. The company he now led was more than profit sheets. It was proof that vision could rise where no one expected it. Hundreds of employees trusted his choices. Communities looked at his story as a mirror of possibility. Yet here, in this polished cabin, one mocking laugh tried to reduce him to less than he was. Marcus kept his hands still, but inside, memory pressed against pride. He thought of his father's last words before illness took him. "Dignity is not for sale, son. It is carried." The briefcase became more than leather. It was his father's voice, his past, and his reminder that every insult weighed less than integrity. Passengers glanced his way, some uneasy, some complicit. Marcus knew he could answer cruelty with sharp words, but that was not his fight. His fight had always been to remain whole when the world tried to cut him in half. The woman's laughter faded, but its sting remained. Marcus leaned slightly forward, resting his hand on the briefcase. The leather was cool beneath his palm, steady and real. He breathed deeply, letting the air fill him, slow and measured. The insult lingered in the cabin's silence, but so did his resolve. He tightened his grip on the briefcase as if holding not just an object, but the journey that made him unbreakable. The pearls around Eleanor Whitmore's neck gleamed like cold drops of light. They rested neatly against her pressed blouse, each bead smooth and perfect, passed down from her mother as if they carried not just wealth, but an unspoken command: you belong above others. Eleanor carried herself with that belief. From the moment she stepped onto the plane, her posture was straight, her chin slightly raised. She had paid for her seat with ease, never doubting it was hers to claim. To her, luxury was not a gift, it was her right. Yet beneath her polished surface was something less steady. Eleanor had grown up in a family where image mattered more than truth. Her father taught her that power was a performance. Appear successful, and people will believe it. Her mother's pearls became the symbol of that lesson. Whenever Eleanor felt small, she touched them. Whenever she feared being ignored, she made sure they caught the light. Now on this flight, she saw Marcus Hayes not as a fellow traveler but as a disruption to her performance. His quiet strength unsettled her. She had built her life on the idea that her world was reserved, exclusive, untouched. But here he was, seated across the aisle, holding himself with a calm that made her pearls feel like costume jewelry. Her laugh, sharp and rehearsed, was her defense. It was easier to mock than to admit the unease that stirred inside her. If she could draw others into her laughter, she could hide her own insecurity. Her words, "Some people only look first class," were less about Marcus and more about her own fear of losing control over the stage she believed was hers. The cabin gave her mixed signals. Some passengers avoided her gaze, unsure how to respond. Others shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. In Eleanor's mind, silence was agreement. Every averted eye confirmed her belief that she had spoken what others secretly thought, but dared not say. The pearls pressed against her skin as she lifted her glass of champagne. She tilted it toward her companion, who offered a weak smile. The bubbles rose quickly, then vanished, much like the confidence behind her words. But Eleanor convinced herself otherwise. She clung to the pearls, to the wealth they represented, to the entitlement they promised. For Eleanor, dignity came not from kindness but from status. She measured herself by seats purchased, by jewelry displayed, by the ability to laugh without consequence. That was her armor. She did not see that every laugh revealed more of the emptiness beneath. The plane's hum filled the silence after her voice. The sound was steady, unbothered by her performance, a reminder that the world beyond her pearls was larger and stronger than her show. But Eleanor ignored it. She looked around the cabin searching for approval. Her lips curved into a smirk. In her mind, the cabin had agreed with her. The silence was hers to own. She leaned back, pearls glinting in the overhead light, convinced her laughter had set the tone for the flight. The cabin was a stage, and silence became its loudest sound. Eleanor's laughter floated in the air like smoke, and everyone inside the polished business-class cabin felt it. Some turned away, others froze, all caught between discomfort and fear of involvement. A man in a navy suit shifted in his seat, eyes fixed on the glowing screen of his tablet, though he had stopped reading minutes ago. His finger hovered unmoving above the glass. Across the aisle, a woman stirred her coffee though it was already cold, the spoon clinking softly, a nervous rhythm to fill the quiet. No one spoke. Silence wrapped around the cabin like a curtain pulled tight. It was safer not to interfere, safer not to be noticed. Each passenger weighed the risk of stepping into the moment against the comfort of staying invisible. A young couple near the window exchanged glances. The woman's eyes questioned. The man's eyes warned back. Don't. Courage trembled, then folded into stillness. One flight attendant, Emily, moved down the aisle with her cart. She had heard every word. She had felt the sting of it, even though it was not aimed at her. Her training told her to keep the peace, but her heart told her peace had already been broken. She looked at Marcus, calm, silent, his hand resting on that old briefcase, and something inside her tightened. Without a word, she poured a glass of water and set it before him, her eyes meeting his for a single beat. It was not much, but it was a signal. Quiet disapproval. Quiet respect, Eleanor, pearls shining, mistook the silence for victory. She leaned back in her seat, sipping her champagne, certain the cabin shared her judgment. She believed silence meant agreement. She did not see the unease carved into faces around her. The hum of the engines filled the space where words should have been. It was steady, indifferent, reminding everyone that the plane was moving forward even as human courage stalled. A man near the front pretended to sleep, his head tilted back, though his jaw was tight. Another passenger pulled out noise-canceling headphones, not to block sound, but to block conscience. Avoidance became their shield. Emily parked the cart and stood still for a moment. Her jaw clenched, her hands folded neatly at her waist. She wanted to speak, but she knew the power of hierarchy, the thin line between duty and consequence. So she said nothing, her silence heavy with meaning. The quiet pressed harder, becoming a mirror for every passenger. It asked them a question they did not want to face. Was silence protecting peace or protecting cruelty? Marcus sat still, eyes lowered, his dignity intact. But the absence of defense from others made the insult louder. Each second stretched, building weight in the room. Then the stillness cracked. A child's voice, small and unguarded, rose from the bulkhead row. "Mom," he asked, his words clear. "Why is that lady mean?" The question pierced the quiet sharper than Eleanor's laugh had. Heads turned. No one could pretend they had not heard. In innocence, the child had spoken the truth the adults had hidden. The cabin waited for Marcus to speak, but no words came. He sat still, hands folded, his eyes calm but unyielding. Around him the air felt heavy, stretched by the weight of insult and the absence of response. Silence became his answer, and silence became his strength. Eleanor filled that silence with her echo. Her laugh returned, sharper now, like glass striking metal. She leaned toward her companion again, making sure her voice carried. "Some people forget where they belong," she said, her pearls trembling slightly as she tipped her glass. Her confidence was loud, her cruelty louder. Marcus did not flinch. He looked down at his briefcase, the leather faded by time, its handle smoothed by years of work. His father's words, "Carry this when you build something of your own," moved through his mind like a steady current. In that moment, the briefcase was more than memory. It was his anchor, passengers noticed. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing between Marcus's silence and Eleanor's laughter. A few looked at the floor, afraid their eyes might betray them. The silence they chose was easier than the courage they avoided. The child who had asked why that lady was mean now sat hushed by his mother, his wide eyes fixed on Marcus. Even a child could see the unfairness, yet the adults around him stayed still. That contrast deepened the wound. Eleanor mistook Marcus's quiet for weakness. She laughed again, louder, as if trying to prove that her voice could fill every corner of the cabin. The sound bounced off the walls, echoing longer than it should. But in truth, her laughter was beginning to sound hollow, stretched thin against Marcus's calm refusal to answer. The hum of the engines grew louder in the silence that followed. It was steady, powerful, unstoppable, like Marcus himself. His choice not to speak was not surrender. It was resistance in its purest form. Dignity does not need to shout. Emily, the flight attendant, watched closely. She saw how Marcus carried himself, how he protected his pride with restraint instead of anger. She also saw Eleanor pressing harder, desperate to win an audience. Emily's hand tightened around the edge of the service cart, her own silence a battle between duty and conscience. The tension rose with every second. Some passengers hoped it would fade away, others feared it would explode. But Marcus's silence held the moment in balance, steady as stone. Eleanor leaned back in her seat, a smirk across her face. She believed she had won the room. Her pearls glittered under the light, but their beauty was only surface, a mask hiding insecurity. Her echo filled the space, but Marcus's quiet dignity outshone it. The imbalance could not last forever. Something had to break it. The passengers felt it. Emily felt it. Marcus himself knew it. The silence was too heavy, the laughter too sharp. A line had been crossed, and the flight itself seemed to wait for justice to answer. Then, a sound pierced the stillness. The intercom dinged. Every head turned toward the front of the plane. The pilot cleared his throat. The chime from the intercom cut through the tension like a blade. Every passenger lifted their head. The cabin, which had been filled with sharp laughter and heavy silence, now braced for a voice that carried more weight than any other on the plane. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot began, his tone calm, steady, and unmistakably firm. The hum of the engines softened beneath his words, as if even the machine respected him. At first, it sounded like a routine message, the kind passengers half heard before returning to their screens. But then the pilot's voice shifted, sharpened with intention. "I am aware," he said slowly, "that some words spoken here tonight have not shown the respect every traveler deserves. On this flight, there are no lesser seats, and there are no lesser people. We are all crossing the same sky, breathing the same air, trusting the same wings." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through the cabin. Eleanor's smirk faltered. Her pearls caught the light, but their shimmer could not mask the sudden weight pressing down on her. The pilot continued, each phrase measured, each pause deliberate. "We are entrusted to bring every soul on board safely to their destination. Safety is not only about engines and weather, it is also about dignity. Cruelty in any form has no place here." Passengers stirred. Some looked directly at Eleanor now, their silence broken by the authority in the pilot's voice. Others shifted with relief, grateful that someone had spoken aloud what they had not dared to say. Eleanor gripped her glass tighter. Her laughter had filled the space only minutes before, echoing against the walls. Now that same space belonged to a voice she could not challenge. The intercom, a simple piece of plastic and wire, had become the channel of justice. The pilot's tone deepened. "If anyone believes their worth is greater because of wealth, status, or appearance, I remind you, the sky does not care. The clouds do not bow to gold. Up here we are equal, and we must treat each other that way." Marcus lifted his eyes, his face calm, but inside, something stirred. He had chosen silence, had carried insult with dignity. But now someone else had spoken for truth. The burden no longer sat on his shoulders alone. Eleanor's echo was gone. Her laughter, once sharp, now felt foolish in the shadow of solemn authority. She glanced around, searching for agreement, but the silence was different now. It was no longer her ally. The pilot gave one final message, his words firm as steel. "This flight will continue in respect. I trust every passenger will remember that. Thank you." The intercom clicked off. The engines hummed again, steady and strong, but the atmosphere inside had changed. The cabin seemed lighter, though no one moved at first. Then a sound began, small, hesitant. A single pair of hands clapped near the back. Another joined, then another. The applause spread, uneven at first, uneasy but growing louder, stronger until it filled the cabin. Eleanor froze. Her pearls no longer glimmered with power. She sat still, her glass untouched, while the sound of approval for justice rolled around her. The applause was not wild or celebratory. It was steady, deliberate, like a verdict. And for the first time on that flight, dignity was not silent. The applause struck Eleanor harder than any word could. It rose slowly at first, then gathered strength, echoing through the cabin until there was no corner where she could hide. Each clap felt like a verdict, each sound a reminder that her laughter had not been shared. It had been judged. She sat rigid, pearls pressed tightly against her neck, her fingers clenched around the stem of her champagne glass. For years she had believed those pearls made her untouchable, a symbol of wealth passed down through bloodlines and status. But now their shimmer betrayed her. Instead of power, they reflected exposure. Passengers no longer avoided her. Some looked at her directly, their eyes sharp with disapproval. Others shook their heads slightly, gestures small but heavy with meaning. Eleanor felt their stares like heat against her skin. The same silence that once protected her now condemned her. Her companion shifted uncomfortably, his earlier smirk gone. He leaned back as though distance might free him from her shadow. Eleanor tried to lift her chin, tried to summon the same smirk she had worn minutes before, but the muscles in her face betrayed her. The mask cracked. The humiliation was sharp because it was mirrored. She had laughed at Marcus to make him small in the eyes of others. Now the cabin saw her through the same lens she had forced on him. Cruelty had become her reflection, and it was merciless. Eleanor's mind raced for excuses. Perhaps the passengers misunderstood. Perhaps the pilot had spoken too broadly. But excuses do not silence truth. She had been unmasked, and the mask could not be put back on. Her pearls trembled faintly with every breath. They were no longer elegant jewels, but chains of exposure, each bead pressing into her neck like a reminder of her arrogance. The very symbol of her supposed grace now revealed her fragility. Across the aisle, Marcus remained still. He did not gloat. He did not even meet her gaze. His silence made her fall heavier, for it showed that his dignity did not require her humiliation. It required only his restraint, and her collapse became her own doing. The applause slowly faded, but the shift remained. The cabin was no longer hers to control. Eleanor sat surrounded by the weight of judgment, her once confident posture shrinking under its force. Her wealth could not shield her. Her pearls could not protect her. In the end, the stage she thought belonged to her revealed her not as powerful, but as small. She lowered her head, the pearls trembling against her neck. The applause faded, but its echo lived on in the cabin's air. It was not wild, not celebratory. It was steady, deliberate, like justice spoken through hands. When it ended, silence returned, but this silence was different. It no longer belonged to cruelty. It belonged to dignity. Marcus sat still, his face calm, his posture steady. He had not spoken a single word through the ordeal. Yet now it was clear. Silence had been his weapon. Silence his defense, silence his victory. Eleanor sat shrinking into her seat, pearls trembling against her neck. Her earlier laughter had seemed sharp and unshakable. Now it looked fragile, a sound that had already faded, leaving only shame in its place. But Marcus did not stare at her. He did not smirk. He did not claim triumph. His eyes stayed forward, his dignity untouched by her fall. Passengers glanced at him, waiting for a reaction, perhaps expecting him to speak, to reclaim his honor with words. But Marcus understood something greater. Honor had already spoken. His silence had drawn a line stronger than anger could ever draw. He reached down, his hand brushing against the leather briefcase. Its surface was worn, its corners bent, but it carried more pride than any jewel or luxury in the room. That briefcase was not just an object. It was history, struggle, and perseverance bound in leather. It reminded him of his father's voice, steady and sure. Dignity is carried, not granted. For Marcus, victory did not mean Eleanor's humiliation. Victory meant keeping his promise to himself, to rise without letting bitterness take root, to endure without letting cruelty shape him. His quiet presence was proof that restraint could be stronger than retaliation. Around him, passengers shifted. Their expressions changed. Where once there had been unease, now there was respect. Emily, the flight attendant, stood near the aisle, her eyes soft with recognition. She had witnessed the whole exchange and knew the difference between silence born of fear and silence born of strength. The engines hummed on, steady as ever, guiding the plane through unseen winds. Marcus let the sound ground him. He breathed in deeply, not with relief, but with resolve. The cabin, once heavy with insult, was now lighter, transformed by his calm refusal to break. He adjusted his posture, not to display pride, but to ease into the comfort of knowing he had held true to himself. His silence had not been weakness. It had been discipline. His dignity had not been borrowed. It had been earned. Slowly, Marcus lifted the briefcase from beside his leg and placed it down gently at his feet. The gesture was quiet, almost ordinary, yet it spoke volumes. It was the closing of a chapter, the settling of weight that had been carried not in leather, but in character. The cabin had changed. What once felt heavy with insult now carried a new stillness, calm but not empty, calm with meaning. The echo of applause lingered like a quiet verdict, reminding every passenger that dignity had been defended, not by anger, but by truth spoken through authority and silence. The flight resumed its rhythm. Glasses clinked softly, trays slid back into place, and screens lit up again. Yet nothing was the same. Each passenger carried the memory of what they had just witnessed. Some sat straighter, humbled. Others kept their eyes lowered, uneasy with the knowledge that they had stayed quiet too long. Eleanor remained still, her pearls resting cold against her skin. The weight of them no longer felt like privilege. They felt like chains. She stared at her untouched champagne, the bubbles rising and fading, symbols of the confidence that had slipped away. Her smirk was gone. Pride once loud now lay silent. Across the aisle, Marcus sat with calm resolve. He had not raised his voice, not even once. His silence had stood taller than her laughter. The briefcase at his feet, worn and weathered, seemed to glow with quiet pride. It was more than leather. It was legacy, proof that character outlasts insult. The passengers who once avoided looking at him now glanced with respect. Not a word passed between them, but their eyes carried apologies, admiration, and lessons learned. Even Emily, the flight attendant, felt changed. Her earlier hesitation now burned as a reminder. Courage must speak, even when duty urges silence. The hum of the engines filled the cabin. Steady as ever, but now it sounded different, like a song of endurance, carrying everyone forward. The sky outside stretched wide and endless, its calmness a mirror to Marcus's restraint. The pilot's voice had closed the moment, but its message remained alive in the minds of all who had heard it. Worth is not measured by wealth, race, or status. Respect is not optional. Dignity belongs to every soul. As the plane climbed higher, the turbulence of conflict faded. The aircraft pierced a thick layer of clouds, and then light broke through. Sunlight poured into the cabin, bright and unfiltered, washing the faces of everyone inside. It touched Eleanor, it touched Marcus, it touched every silent witness alike. In that moment, the sunlight became more than light. It became judgment and grace together. It revealed, it restored, and it reminded. The flight was no longer just a journey across miles. It had become a lesson written in the sky itself. Justice had been spoken aloud, and dignity had won. The plane sailed forward, wrapped in light.